From today onwards, we will then begin the study of Uttaratantra Shastra. This particular text, during studying of this, I think we are quite fortunate to have such an opportunity to encounter the Mahayana Sutra, the Mahayana teachings, especially the teachings that passed down from Maitreya Buddha, from Maitreya Bodhisattva. And I think this teaching will bring great benefits to all of us in terms of our practice. Even if you don't understand the most profound aspect of this teaching, as long as you have faith, have a joyful mind, and receiving the oral transmissions of this particular teaching, then the blessings and merits are immeasurable. Therefore, I think let it be a practitioner, maybe a practitioner who are looking for gaining merits through studying so that you can then eliminate lots of defilements. And another group of you who are in this audience are scholars. This particular text is a quite important text in the West as well as the East, because this is the text that talks about the Tathagarbha, the Buddha nature. So, during the teaching of this text, I plan to teach it through both aspects, from practitioners' aspects as well as the academic aspects. And we're going to teach mainly on the stanzas, but also we're going to use the commentary from Taranatha. We're using Taranatha's explanation on this Shastra to study, and I'm going to use it as an outline to teach. And mostly we'll use it as a reference. First of all, I would like to talk about the merits of studying this Uttaratantra Shastra, which was introduced to you earlier in the earlier classes as well. It says in the text saying that mostly people use practicing compassion to make offering with generosity, uphold precepts, and using such ways to accumulate merits. In fact, if you can listen to this teaching with respect, then the merit of which is much greater. It is stated in the chapter 5, the benefit chapter. In the stanza, within this book, in the text, it says that on the Chinese version, on the page 331, it says that someone striving for enlightenment may turn to the Dharma kings, offering golden fields adorned with gems of equal number to the atoms in the Buddha fields, and may continue doing so every day. Another may just hear a word of this, and upon hearing it, becoming filled with devotion. He will attain merits far greater and more manifold than the virtue sprung from this practice of giving. The merit of making such great offering of gold fields adorned with gems, and you do it every day, is still less than the merit of listening to the teaching of Uttaratantra and generate great faith in it. Now let's contemplate on ourselves. We don't have enough gold and gems to adorn those lands and then make offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We sometimes have flowers and have fruit and make such kind of offerings. Still, we have a stinginess about those. But upon hearing a word of Uttaratantra Shastra, you will attain merits far greater than making such great offering. An intelligent person wishing for enlightenment may be body, speech, and mind, guard flawless moral conduct and do so effortlessly, even through many eons. Another may just hear a word of this, and upon hearing it, becomes fulfilled with devotion. He will then attain merits far greater than and more manifold than the virtue sprung from this discipline. So, upholding the perfect precept for eons and eons, such kind of merit is still less than the merit than hearing a word from Uttaratantra Shastra and generate faith in it. Also, someone here may finally achieve the divine meditative stability and Brahma's abode, thus quenching all afflictions' fire within the three realms of existence, and may cultivate these as a means to reach unchanging and perfect enlightenment. Another may just hear a word of this, and upon hearing it become filled with devotion. He will attain merits far greater and more manifold than virtues sprung from this meditation. Therefore, before the teaching of this Uttaratantra Shastra, I really hope that you can generate great faith and devotion in this text, because it talks quite a bit about why and the reason behind the Buddha nature. Of course, for those of you who don't have any faith, if you don't recognize the Buddha's words as true and Maitreya Bodhisattva's words as true, then of course I can't do much about it. But from my perspective, from a Buddhist perspective, I really think this opportunity of studying this Uttaratantra Shastra is in fact quite incredible. For those of you who are attending classes over here, I think that we should have the after-class discussion group. But for those of you who are not in the discussion group, let you be the divine beings who live up or the beings who live underneath or so on, I really hope that you could have a glimpse of the teachings of Buddha nature. When we try to understand Buddhism, when we try to study Buddhism, I think at first we talk about the truth of suffering, truth of the compounded, the accumulation of suffering, and then the truth of cessation of suffering and the path of cessation. And then in the second turning, we talk about bodhicitta and compassion. And in the also in the Prajna Paramita, we talk about how all the phenomena are empty. It is then devoid of all fabrications and all extremes. In the third turning of the Dharma wheel, the Buddha then taught how the sentient beings has luminosity. And the seed of such luminosity is there. If you say that there is nothing in sentient beings, then how could they attain Buddhahood? So it is not just the extreme of a nihilistic view of the emptiness. In the Prajna Paramita, we talk about how form is emptiness and emptiness is form. The form is emptiness that is taught in the second turning of the Dharma wheel. And in the third turning of the Dharma wheel, we talk about the emptiness is form, because emptiness that we are talking about is not just nihilistic emptiness or voidness. This kind of teaching is included in the Tantras. In the Tantras, we talk about the form is no other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. And then there's a story where it talks about how at the beginning we see mountains as mountains and waters as water, and in the middle you see that the mountains are no longer mountains and the water is no longer water, but at the end you see mountains as mountains and water as water again. And so it has quite profound meanings in it. Some Buddhists, when they're studying emptiness, the text on emptiness, such as the 400 stanzas on emptiness of Madhyamika and so on, they will then understand how emptiness works. But today we're going to talk about from the other aspect about how the Buddha nature is no increasing or no decreasing. There is no birth and no death of such Buddha nature. So everything within this nature is devoid of all kinds of grasping. So in this study of this particular teaching, I really hope that all of you could give rise to a greater devotion. Of course, there are people who would wonder why could people get enlightened? If we don't have the Buddha nature, then how can we attain Buddhahood? If there is no cause and no condition for Buddhahood to arise, and how could that be possible? That is flawed. It wouldn't go through any inferences. It has many faults that could attach to such statement. Therefore, today I'm going to then share this Uttaratantra Shastra with all of you. As I just stated earlier, during the teaching of this time, I think we should refer back to the Taranata's explanation on this Uttaratantra. I think this text, in fact, has lots of special connections to all of us. Back in around 15 years back, Pangsu Rinpoche passed into parinirvana after only teaching for 9 years. At that time, I was also doing simultaneous translation for him at that time. he taught Mipa Rinpoche's commentary on this Uttaratantra Shastra. And then around that time when it was almost the Sukhavati Dharma assembly, then the sister of Phuntsok Rinpoche passed away. And then, after 9 classes of teaching this particular Shastra, Phuntsok Rinpoche then passed away as well. At first, he gave lots of teachings from Mipa Rinpoche. Mostly, he followed the explanation and the Shastra's teaching. He basically followed the teaching and without much of his own explanation. So I listened to part of the recording from then this morning. And I will point out where he stopped in this lifetime when we get there as well. I myself, I really wanted to teach this particular Shastra, but I didn't have such an opportunity to do so until this year. I've then translated this as well as the Taranata's explanation into Chinese. There are many commentaries on this particular Shastra. Phuntsok Rinpoche and many masters attach great importance onto this Shastra. Of course, there are many other different translations and editions that's available, including in the Tibetan text, Tibetan version, the Gyaltsabje, he wrote a commentary, as well as Guru Tsawa, who was the author of the Blue Annal, also made a commentary on this particular Shastra. His commentary is a rather extensive commentary that has 2 big volumes. There's a short commentary also in front of Khenpo Noro around 1985. That was the first time I listened to this Shastra. Around that summer, Phuntsok Rinpoche took a few people to Nyarong, and then in Larungar we had a few classes, only about 40 to 50 people. Around that time, Khenpo Gardo was teaching the Bodhicharya Avatara, and Khenpo Noro was teaching us the Uttaratantra Shastra. I was really happy because that was a time that I first listened to this Shastra, and I was quite diligent at that time. Also, it was the first time that I get to know what Buddha nature was. I was studying in the Buddha nature for the first time. Now, when I think about it, I can still remember all the scenes of studying the Uttaratantra Shastra. There was not many houses in Larungar at that time, only about 40 to 50. There were a lot of poisonous snakes and lots of marmots around. When it's sunny, we would sit outside and on the grass and listen to the teachings of Uttaratantra Shastra. And sometimes the marmots would come to us and would ask for food from us, and we would feed them with some leaves and grass and so on. Sometimes the Khenpo would complain, "Would you please do not do that during class? Can you do that after class?" He has really great temper. Unlike me, when I see people who are not attentive during the class, I can't handle it. But he is not like that. He's very mild in temper. Even if we argue and debate during class really loudly, he would say that, "Could you please lower your voice?" He's very mild in temper. So that was the one that I studied during the year 1985. There are many other texts and commentaries from different schools and from different masters as well. Lots of reference as well. But why I chose Taranata's commentary as a reference this time? It is because, first of all, Phuntsukul Rinpoche, when he was alive, he attached great importance of this particular commentary. When I translated many texts, I translated from different schools, Gelupa, Kagyupa, Nyingmapa, Sakyapa, but not very much from the Jonam school. But since I had the aspiration of translating all different schools of commentaries and teachings, therefore I chose this one. Also, the Jonam school nowadays is not as well spread on this Tibetan plateau, but when it just started, it was very popular. It was quite prosperous back then. In fact, the teaching of Jonampa teach much about from the aspect of other emptiness, or teach from the Buddha nature aspect, from the Sutrayana aspect. And from Tantrayana aspect, they teach lots of pith instructions from the color chakras, teaching, and the six kinds of preliminary practices. On top of that, this Master Taranata, he started practicing around 17 years old, 17 years of age, and he seemed to have great ability to communicate with different bodhisattvas, just like human beings to human beings. He also taught at Sakya school. At that time, during the time he was teaching at a Sakya school, at that time, the Sakya school did not allow them to teach anything but the Sakya school teaching. But since Taranata then went overboard and started teaching others, he was expelled from that school. Lots of great masters from Tibet, they all been expelled, such as Longchenpa and so on. He also composed many other commentaries. After 100 years, Taranata then was born. He was the uncle of the 5th Dalai Lama. He also was considered as a reincarnation of Longchenpa. I think it was included in the biography. During that period of time, the teaching of Jonampa was rather quite prosperous. Paulson Rinpoche then later why Jonampa was not included in the 4 great schools of Tibetan Buddhism. The Sutrayana Teachings all had their own system of studying the 5 great treatises, but in Jonampa they don't really have such a complete system of studying the 5 great treatises. Their most emphasis was on the Buddhist logics. So it may be of that reason it is not that popular at this time, but it is quite important to then again revive the teachings of Jonampa. That is why this time I chose to teach from the commentary of Taranatha from the Jonam school. Also, I was requested from lots of the Jonampa masters. They've requested me many times, and many masters requested me many times. Therefore, as such an auspicious request, then I translated Taranatha's commentary. Also, it is part of my promise, so now I'm fulfilling my promise. Today, this text is one of the 5 Maitreya's treatises. What are the 5 treatises? According to the Tibetan history and on the Tibetan plateau, we all agree that those are the 5 treatises that's composed by Maitreya Bodhisattva, and after Asanga, who practiced in the mountains, and then he, after attaining some realization, but couldn't really he couldn't feel any kind of insights that could arise from his practice, and then at that time he decided to go down after 6 years. Halfway through, he met a person who was trying to make an iron rod into a thin needle. He thought to himself, well, if a worldly person would spend such diligence into such boring things, why would I give up my practice that is really valuable? So he went back to his cave. He went back to his practicing cave again and continued to practice for another 3 years. But after 3 years, he felt that there was no insight, no auspicious dream, and not any sign of realization at all. Then he went down again. He saw a person who was trying to sweep the mountain away with a feather. He thought to himself, well, then if a worldly person is so very diligent in doing such a non-valuable thing, why wouldn't I continue to engage in my practice again? Well, sometimes when I go to the school that I founded, I saw this mountain that's right in front of the school, and it blocks the sunlight, especially in the winter. It's very cold. So I would think to myself, why shouldn't I then sweep the mountain away with a feather then? That's how I felt at that time. I remember this story. Every time I go to the school, I feel that was I felt that was the inspiration for me to remember that story, because the sunlight really was blocked by the mountains over there. Anyhow, Asanga then at that time thought to himself, well, then I should engage in something that's more valuable. And then he came back and then practiced for another 3 years without any insights or any signs of realization. So he's practiced over there for 12 years in total. And then he left the cave and he felt that there's no way that he can attain any realization at all. But on the way, he saw this dog which was rotten from waist down and was very much hurt, and lots of maggots was crawling on that dog. He gave rouse to great compassion, and then at that time he knelt down in front of the dog and then tried to use his tongue to pick up the maggots, because he doesn't want to use the hand or anything else to hurt the maggots either. At that time, when he closed his eyes, he was trying to use his tongue to get the maggots out. He then opened his eyes and he saw the Buddha Maitreya was in front of him. Saw Maitreya Bodhisattva in front of him. Then Maitreya Bodhisattva appeared in front of him. Asanga was rather feeling upset at that moment, saying that I've been practicing for 12 years and you didn't give me any sign, not even a good dream. And then Maitreya Bodhisattva said that, well, I've never really departed from you, but it is because that you never really gave rouse to the genuine compassion, therefore you could never see me. It is only that after seeing the dog, you give rouse to great compassion. That's how you can see me. If you don't believe me, why don't you carry me on your shoulder and walk around in the bazaar, in the market, and then see if people could see me or not. So he did so and walked around in the markets, and indeed no one could see Maitreya Bodhisattva except there was one old woman who had rather a bit more compassion, and she saw a dead dog corpse on the shoulder of Asanga. And then Asanga was brought into the celestial realm by Maitreya Bodhisattva, and that's where he then heard and studied the 5 treatises of Maitreya. That's how it is well known in Tibet. But in the Han tradition, it is said that according to Dunlun from Tang Dynasty, he then wrote a commentary on the Yogacarya Shastra, and in that Shastra it says that Maitreya Buddha then, instead of bringing Asanga along to the celestial realm, he actually descended from the celestial realm to Asanga and then taught Asanga the 5 treatises, which included the ornament of Mahayana Sutra, the distinguishing middle from extremes, and distinguishing the Yogacara Shastra and Vajra Prajna Paramita Shastra, and as well as the distinguishing Dharma and Dharmata. So the teachings are a bit different than the ones that's included in the Tibetan tradition. Five treatises of the 5 treatises of Maitreya. Well, today we do have a little more people showing up listening to this class, but maybe tomorrow, I'm not quite sure you will attend or not. If you're studying, it is best to listen to the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Otherwise, I know there are a lot of people who attend the first and then the last class, nothing in the middle. That's not really good. I see that there are people who are attending. There are people who are attending the after-class discussion group. At the beginning, there were more people. In the middle, not as many, and the last day was not that much. It is quite important to be persistent. Maybe at the beginning, you feel quite inspired to listen to the Uttaratantra Shastra by the Maitreya, and then you lose interest halfway and don't want to continue with it anymore. I don't think that's very good. I see some Sangha members persist all the way through for years and decades. They would not miss out any class, especially people from different countries. I know that because of the different time zone, there are people who had to attend the class during commute time, during meal time, during work even. But I really appreciate that you persist all the way through. Because when you look back at your life, this is quite valuable that you've studied great sutras and shastras. Whichever Khenpo or Khenmo give teaching to the class, I know there are people who have great joy to listen to the Dharma. And I think if you really listened and persisted all the way through the classes, you will gain great benefits. Of course, I'm not selling this class like a merchant who is selling a fortified product, because a fortified product would appear to be genuine and good at first, but there's no value to it. But this kind of teaching is not like that at all. After listening to such teachings, you will gain great benefits at the beginning, the middle, and at the end. Today, for those of you who are attending this class, and especially after listening to the merits of and especially for those of you whomsoever wanting to gain merits through listening to such great teaching, you might be quite disappointed, because today we're not going to give any teaching about those verses at all. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. So it was translated into Chinese back in the 6th century. The person who's translated this from the Sanskrit version to Chinese version, his name is Ratna Maitri. But during his translation, he did not remark who was the author of this Uttaratantra Shastra. I think around maybe during the 90s, I bought the text, the Chinese text of this translation. But when I compared it with the Tibetan version, I found that it has lots of differences. So the mainland received the teaching of the Buddha nature in a rather early period of time. Then in the 7th century, one of the patriarchs of the Tiantai school, Master Fa Zhang, he then translated this
论的这个讲述当中呢，就是说是这个。
He then taught on the Uttaratantra Shastra.
究竟一场这个报信论呢，实际上是见会。
And in that teaching, he said that it was then written by Master Jianhui. And because of that,
包括就是现在那个就日本的这个大藏经当中的话呢，就是也是
included in the Japanese Tripitaka. The author's name is written as Master Jianhui. Or I think that view is rather popular. In the Korean version of Tripitaka, it also is translated, is also included in the Korean version of Tripitaka, maybe translated in the 60s, in the 1960s. In fact, Uttaratantra Shastra was considered as the product, a written product, or that is composed by Master Jianhui. Majority of people from this school would consider that. Around the 10th century, Marpa Lotsawa's teacher, his name is Matripa. Some history says that states that he was the one who then found the 5 treatises, and some others say that he was the one who they rediscovered the distinguishing the middle from the extreme. It was then translated into Tibetan, and the teaching of Uttaratantra Shastra was then taught and propagated on the Tibetan plateau. But in Tibet, we all consider that this particular text is composed by Maitreya Bodhisattva, and there's no argument about it at all. And the Uttaratantra Shastra, just like Bodhicharyavatara, it is a text that is widely taught by all schools, and there are many different commentaries on it. Also, many masters consider that this text has such great, profound meanings within, and in order to hear this teaching, you have to have empowerment first. The title of it is Uttaratantra, which means the tantra that is unsurpassable. So it is not just any kind of normal or ordinary teaching. Rather, it is a tantra. And this is taught by Maitreya Bodhisattva. The 4 of his 5 treatises are considered as Sutrayana Teachings, and this one is considered as a Vajrayana teaching.
那么我们这个那到底是这个是到底是这个弥勒菩萨做的，就是还是
Maitreya Bodhisattva, or then the Master Jianhui's translation? In fact, there are quite a bit of controversial about it, because
我想可能是汉传佛教的这个译本
The translation from mainland
褒义的这个议论这个译本当中呢，就是没有这个
does not have the author's name included.
当时也是很了不起的。
In fact, Ranamati is a great translator. He translated many different texts, including the Tembumi Sutra.
这个贡献的，那这样一来呢，就是一直就并不是就是像那个藏传佛教认为的那样，是这个就是弥勒菩萨这个所造的。那后来呢，
the majority of
这个31年吧，就是
majority of the
opinion
is that the Master Jianhui actually translated this text, but during the 1930s, 1931, a Russian translator, he translated this text from Tibetan to English. His name is Obermiller.
30年代就是在那个时候，但后来呢，就是大概
around 1935,
在那个时候呢，就是
an Indian scholar, his name is Rahula, and he
在中亚地区呢，就是找到了这个
discovered the Sanskrit version of Uttaratantra Shastra. That's the first time of discovering the Sanskrit version from India, from East Asia, from the Middle East Asia area. After comparing it, the Sanskrit version and Tibetan version is very similar. And later on, there was a scholar. His name is Johnston from Oxford University. He's quite great. He knows many languages. He stayed in India for many years. He knows Sanskrit, Tibetan, and Chinese. And then, of course, English, because he stayed in Oxford University. So he knows the 4 languages.
那4种文字精通的话，那就是他后来呢，就是这个汉译本，然后梵文本，然后藏文本，就是这3个这个
compared the Tibetan, Sanskrit, and Chinese version.
那就是基本上
There was not much of a difference.
没有很大的这个出入。那这个时候呢，就是他就大概是好像他自己的是1942年的时候，好像
I think he passed away around 1942.
很好的这样的这个
But he
编辑
then made comparison and additions of the he made different comparisons of the text on the version of Sanskrit text and the English text that's translated by Obermiller.
找到了，就是印度人这个找到了，所以就是刚才跟大家就是
So the book that was just showing on the screen,
就是说是在
that
英
was
国来讲的
the
话呢，
first
应该是
text
第一次
that's published
就是
in
用英文的
English
这个方式来就是做
and with
这本书是
comparison
这个
with
非常
Sanskrit.
重要的，
This is
也就是说
quite
它里面就是
important
怎么讲的呢？就是说这个达成
development.
无上这个绪论的话呢，实际上弥勒菩萨所造
And on the title it says that
这个藏文
it
当
is the
中
Uttaratantra
说是弥勒
Shastra
菩萨
by
所造的
Maitreya.
然后刚才那个梵文当中的话呢，就是有所这个弥勒菩萨
Similarly, it is
所造的
stated
而且
in
藏文的这个
Sanskrit
版本
version
跟这个梵文
and
的
the
版本
Tibetan version
那
and
么就是
Sanskrit
这两
version
个呢
are
就完全都是
very
吻合的，
much
里面极个别的
fitting
道理以外呢，就
with
没有
each
什么
other.
这个出入。
There was
就
not
自从
much
那
of
个
a
时候开始
difference.
呢，应该说这个
And
西
ever
方
since
就
then,
是很多
many
学者的
scholars
话呢
from the
就
West
也认为就是
they
这
all
个宝
consider
性论
that
也
the
就是说是
Uttaratantra
无上绪论
Shastra
呢，就实际上
as
就是什么？就是实际上
a
是
text that's
就是
composed
弥勒菩萨
by Maitreya
所造的
Bodhisattva.
在这个之前的话呢，就是还是有
Maybe
这个
before
议论
that there was
当
still
然这个
controversies.
在西方而言的话呢，就是
But
从那个
for
时
the
候
West,
从那本书
ever
开始
since
呢
the
大概是
publishing
那
of
本
this
书呢，
book
就是这个上个世纪就是1950年的
that
时候呢，
is
正式出版
published
的
back in
那么这个时候开始呢，就
1950,
是在西方呢，
And then the West started to then the West started to then research and study Buddha nature, the philosophy of Buddha nature. On Tibetan plateau, we talk about Buddha nature very much. And around the 6th century, the mainland started talking about Buddha nature. In Tibet, it's from 10th century, and in the West, it is from the 20th century, rather, maybe beginning from the end of 19th century and the early of 20th century. That's the beginning of studying Buddha nature, thinking of Buddha nature. In the mainland, we talk about the 4 stanzas. The first 2 are there was this 4-sentence stanza that the first one says that do not do any evil and conduct all good. And then talk about the Prajnaparamita. The teaching from Tibetan Buddhism, especially on the Buddha nature aspect, is very different than what the Westerners would consider as a norm, which is the origin sin. So after such a long period of time of immersed in the philosophy of the original thing, when the teaching of Buddha nature started to spread in the West, I think many scholars and many people were quite excited about this idea that the purity of all sentient beings' nature. So when you are studying the Buddha nature, I really hope that you could then take reference from the third turning of wheel, such as the praise of the Dhammadhatu and relevant commentaries to this Uttaratantra Shastra, and study and compare and do research. Because in Buddhism, sometimes we talk about emptiness, sometimes we talk about not empty, sometimes we talk about self-empty, sometimes we talk about other empty. And how do you distinguish? How do you then make a choice? So I think in order to understand all of these different terms and different aspects of emptiness, it is quite important to continue to study. And after studying, your doubts will be easily to be dispelled. What I think is that in this in this world, it's quite important to know the history background. I know that in Japan, that nowadays there are editions that is translated from Tibetan to Japanese, and from Sanskrit to Japanese, and from Chinese to Japanese. I think that lots of scholars do attach great importance to this text. That's why there are so many editions. And I think they've spent lots of effort and time to dig the profundity of Uttaratantra Shastra. Similarly, in Europe, there are studies of this text as well. Some French scholars studied this text as well. I think after studying this text, you will then develop a firm belief that everyone do have the Buddha nature do have the inherent Buddha nature. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, it says that to describe the 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva's appearance, it is just like to watch the stars in the night at night. So we need to then study this text in order to understand the profound, the subtle, and the all inherent nature of Buddha nature of all sentient beings. So I think that we should. That's why we should then study this text. From different countries, different ethnics, different language areas, if we can then make analysis and study and research, this is quite important. There are teachers and scholars who would consider that Maitreya Bodhisattva is a person, who is a historical person who really existed, who then met a Sangha, and he was a real person around the same time with the Sangha. So I think people without a background of faith, when they get into the arena of religion, then it is very difficult for them to dig in, because they cannot really get into the profundity of religion without faith. People nowadays, they would only see materialistic appearances as materialistic appearances. They would see, for example, some historical event during Uttaratantra and so on. The Russian scholars and the Indian scholars, the British scholars, they're really great. Sometimes I would I would ponder up on the historical context, up on the historical context myself. During the 1950s, 40s and 50s, that was during the time of the Second World War. Even during such turbulent time, the scholars still invested all their time into research and into study. That is quite rare. During such a chaotic and turbulent world, if they can really dedicate their effort into study, I think that's such a great aspiration and such a great effort they've made. Many scholars were quite great. They were both scientists and scholars and academics and philosophers. I'm not sure if in our modern time, in the 21st century, we still have such devoted academics. Even the people who made lots of travelogues and invested lots of time. In fact, I think it was quite rare. I think from the last century, during such a special time, a period of time, they were still able to invest a lot of their energy and time solely into the study and research. So during the time of the 18th and 19th century, during the World War I and World War II, that was such a bloody time. It was so violent, but many great people really thrived from that time. Not only thrived, they they made a great transformation in terms of their scholarly research.
他们的这个传记呢，确实是比较这个特殊吧，就是我是这样认为的。那今天还要讲多少？我看这个时间。好吧，
Maitreya Bodhisattva. Okay, so we'll stop here today.
好吧。
Tomorrow we'll continue with this class.